The vast expanse of space stretched out beyond the observation windows of the space station. The soft hum of the engines filled the air. As Captain Eleanor Shaw made her way down the long corridors of the station, her boots clicking lightly against the metallic floor, she was calm, collected, her eyes focused on the task ahead. There was no room for fear or hesitation in her line of work. As one of the top human negotiators, she was often called upon to resolve conflicts between different species. But this mission felt different. The stakes were higher, the situation more delicate. Ahead of her was the conference room, where she would meet with several leaders of alien factions, all of whom had gathered to discuss the future of their relationship with humanity. The galaxy was teetering on the brink of war, and the peaceful resolution of this summit was vital. Eleanor knew that she would have to use all her skills to guide the discussion in the right direction. But there was one thing she didn't expect: the coldness that seemed to emanate from the alien leaders as they awaited her arrival. As she stepped into the room, her gaze swept over the alien dignitaries seated at the long, round table. There were Vakar, a towering species of insect-like beings with exoskeletons that shimmered like steel, and the Taimar, a race of beings with translucent skin, their internal organs visible through the layers of their bodies. But the one who caught her attention immediately was the Azanri diplomat, Zaratel. She sat at the head of the table, her dark eyes sharp and calculating. Her posture was regal, almost regal enough to suggest that she might be royalty, and her presence seemed to command the room. Zaratel was an ancient species, older than most of the civilizations that existed in the galaxy. They were known for their wisdom, their power, and their strict sense of honor. But it was also whispered that the Zanre harbored a deep resentment toward humanity. It was said that they blamed humans for the destruction of their homeworld during an ancient conflict. As Eleanor made her way to the table, Zaratel's gaze never wavered. It was as if the Zanri diplomat was sizing her up, trying to figure out what kind of person the human was. Eleanor met her eyes with confidence, not letting a single ounce of fear show. "Captain Shaw," Zaratel said, her voice cool, yet tinged with something else, something Eleanor couldn't quite place. "I trust you know why we are all here." Eleanor nodded, taking her seat at the table. "I understand the importance of these talks, Zaratel," she replied. "I believe that together we can find a way to bring peace to our people." Zaratel's lips curled into a faint smile, though there was no warmth behind it. "I hope so. But peace is not always a simple thing. There are past wounds that need to be healed." There was a sharpness to her words, as if they held more meaning than she was willing to reveal. Eleanor didn't flinch. She had dealt with alien diplomacy many times before. This was just another challenge to overcome. As the talks began, Eleanor listened carefully to the concerns of each faction. The Vakar wanted more territory for their people. The Taimar sought guarantees for their safety as they expanded into new systems. But when it came time for Zaratel to speak, the room fell silent. The ex-Zanri diplomat stood, her tall frame towering over the others, as she addressed the assembly. "The Anre have long memories," Zaratel began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We have watched as the humans expanded across the galaxy, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. We have seen their power, their willingness to destroy everything in their path, to achieve their goals." Eleanor felt a flicker of discomfort at those words, though she remained outwardly composed. She had heard the accusations before. The Anre had long blamed humanity for the loss of their homeworld during an ancient war. But what they didn't know was that humanity had been fighting for its survival. There had been no choice in those days. Zaratel's eyes fixed on Eleanor as she continued. "But I did not come here today to rehash old grievances. I came here to see whether you, Captain Shaw, are truly the kind of human I have heard of, one who is capable of more than just destruction. Or are you just another soldier, a tool in the hands of your people?" Eleanor was taken aback by the directness of Zaratel's question. She had expected challenges, But this was something more personal. She met Zaratel's gaze without hesitation.
I'm not here to fight, Zaratel.
I'm here to find a solution. To prove that humanity is capable of more than what you think. For a moment, the two women stared at each other across the table. It was a silent battle of wills, a test of resolve. Then Zaratel spoke again, her voice softer this time, almost contemplative.
You'll hate me when you know,
she said, the words hanging in the air. You may think you understand, but you will not. Not until I tell you the truth.
Eleanor's brow furrowed in confusion.
The truth? Zaratel's lips twitched into a small, cryptic smile. Yes, the truth about the Zonri. The truth about our history and your people's role in it. Eleanor wasn't sure what to make of it. There was something haunting in Zaratel's tone, something that suggested this wasn't just a matter of political posturing. There was personal weight behind her words, something deeper than mere diplomacy. Eleanor had to know what Zaratel meant. She couldn't walk away from this meeting without understanding. Then, tell me, Eleanor said, her voice steady. What is this truth? Zaratel's eyes darkened, as if she was wrestling with something deep inside herself. For a moment, the air between them was thick with tension. Then, Zaratel leaned forward slightly, her voice low. We were once a peaceful people, she began. Before your ancestors came to us, we were thriving. We were the masters of our own fate, with wisdom that stretched back thousands of years. But when humanity arrived on our doorstep, everything changed. Eleanor remained silent, listening intently as Zaratel continued her story.
Your people, the humans, were in a war for survival.
We were caught in the crossfire, and it destroyed everything we knew. Our homeworld was reduced to rubble, our civilization shattered, and in the end, the humans, your ancestors, were the ones who sealed our fate. You destroyed us. Zaratel's words were a revelation, one that left Eleanor speechless for a moment. She had heard rumors, whispers of an ancient war, but to hear it directly from Zaratel was another thing entirely. The Onri had always believed humanity was their enemy. Now Zaratel was revealing that humanity had played a much darker role in their downfall. But Eleanor didn't respond with anger or fear. Instead, she met Zaratel's gaze, her expression softening. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't know.
No, you wouldn't. Your people don't remember.
But I remember. And I came here today to make you understand. You will hate me when you know the truth. But I must tell you, Captain Shaw, the truth is not what you think it is. Eleanor was left in stunned silence. The truth about the Oxon Ray was far darker than she had imagined. And yet, somehow, she could feel something stirring within her. Could it be that Zaratel's bitterness, her hatred, was not as simple as it appeared? Was there more to this conflict than either of them understood? As the meeting continued, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the answers she sought were not going to come easily. There was much more to this peace process than the negotiations on the table. And somewhere, in the depths of Zaratel's heart, lay a secret that could change everything. But for now, all Eleanor could do was continue listening, hoping that somewhere, within the walls of this station, a path to understanding could be found. Eleanor sat back in her chair, still processing the words that Zaratel had just spoken. The room seemed to grow quieter, the air thicker, as if the very walls themselves were holding their breath. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile what she had just heard. The history of the Onri, as Zaratel described it, was something beyond any enemy she had ever faced before. The destruction of a homeworld, the collapse of a peaceful civilization, and all of it caused by humanity. Eleanor's gaze flickered over to Zaratel, who was now standing by the window, her back to the room. looking out into the endless expanse of space. The Zonri diplomat's shoulders seemed heavy, as if carrying the weight of an ancient grief that had never been released. The sharpness in her eyes had softened slightly, revealing a vulnerability that Eleanor had not expected. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence was filled with the distant hum of the station's engines, the occasional soft hiss of air through the ventilation system, but nothing else. Eleanor didn't know what to say. What could she say? She had been sent here to negotiate peace, but the truth of the past seemed to be far more complicated than a simple agreement could solve. Zaratel turned slowly, her eyes dark but steady.
The Onri were once a proud people, she began again, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. We were not like the others in the galaxy.
We did not fight for territory or power. We fought for knowledge, for understanding, for peace. We traveled the stars, exploring worlds and cultures, learning from all we encountered. We believed that every species had something to offer, something to teach. But then the humans came.
Eleanor's heart skipped.
She was hearing this from the mouth of the very last survivor of the Zonri, a woman who had witnessed the devastation of her people firsthand. It was no longer just a distant story. This was someone who had lived through it, someone who had seen the destruction. Zaratel's hands clenched at her sides, the rage and sorrow bubbling to the surface once again. Your people arrived on our world when we were at our peak, she continued.
We did not know who you were at first. At first, we welcomed you. We thought you were just like us, a species eager to learn, eager to share. But you were different.
You were not interested in peace. You wanted something else.
You wanted to conquer! Eleanor winced at those words.
It was a hard thing to hear, and it stung her in a way she wasn't prepared for. Humans had always been known for their drive, their ambition, their willingness to do whatever it took to survive. But conquest? Was that really how the Zonri saw them? Zaratel continued, her voice a bit sharper now, as if the memories were too much to hold in. We tried to reason with you, to talk, but you did not listen. The humans, your ancestors, attacked us. You destroyed our cities, our culture, our people.
And in the end, you wiped us out. You left nothing behind except broken ruins and a handful of survivors.
Eleanor took a deep breath, her mind still reeling. She wanted to speak, to explain. But what could she say? How could she defend something that had happened so long ago, when humanity itself was still finding its footing in the vastness of space? She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. What could she say that would make sense of this? Zaratel seemed to read her silence, her eyes narrowing slightly.
I know you are thinking it,
she said, her voice now soft, almost pitying.
You are wondering why I don't just let go of this hatred, why I don't forgive.
But you must understand, Captain Shaw. The pain of what happened, it doesn't just disappear. It lives on in every generation of my people.
It has lived on in me, and it will live on in the memory of the Zonri long after I am gone.
Eleanor felt a tightness in her chest. She had heard of war before, of the horrors it brought. But this was something else. This was an entire species, an entire way of life, wiped out by the very people she was trying to represent. She'd been raised on stories of humanity's survival, against all odds, of the strength of the human spirit. But she had never heard the other side, the side of the people who had suffered at humanity's hands. The side that had never been told. She shook her head slowly, trying to steady herself. I didn't know, she said quietly. I didn't know what humanity had done to your people. I was never told. Zaratel's expression softened, though the pain in her eyes never faded. No, you wouldn't know. Most humans don't. You were not part of that time, and your people have tried to move forward. But the truth remains, and now you must know it. Eleanor stood up, the weight of the conversation pressing on her shoulders. She walked to the window, standing beside Zaratel, looking out into the dark void of space. For a long moment, neither spoke. Eleanor's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Anger, guilt, confusion, sadness. How was she supposed to respond to this? How could she fix something so broken, so far gone?
I don't know what to say,
Eleanor said at last, her voice barely a whisper.
I don't know how to make this right.
I can't change what happened. I wasn't there.
I didn't make those decisions. Zaratel turned to her then, her eyes sharp, yet filled with something else, something that might have been a flicker of hope.
No, you were not there.
But you are here now, and that is all that matters. Eleanor looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Zaratel stepped closer, her gaze intense.
The past is the past, Captain Shaw. We cannot undo it.
But we can decide what we do with the future. And that is where humanity, where you, have the power. Eleanor felt a flicker of something inside her. Could it be hope? Could it be possible that the future wasn't set in stone? That the mistakes of the past didn't have to determine the course of history? Could she, a single human, help change the course of this broken relationship between their people? Zarntel's eyes seemed to pierce through her, seeing something that Eleanor wasn't sure she even understood.
I came here not just to confront you with the truth, she said.
I came here to see if you, the humans, were capable of something more. Something beyond conquest, beyond survival. I came here to see if you could show us that you were capable of redemption. Eleanor felt the weight of those words settle heavily on her chest. Redemption. Could humanity ever truly redeem itself in the eyes of those it had wronged? And if so, what would that redemption look like? She didn't have the answers yet. But she knew one thing for certain. This conversation was far from over. Zaratel had opened a door, and for better or worse, Eleanor would have to walk through it. As the two women stood there, the hum of the space station filled the silence, and Eleanor couldn't help but wonder what the future held for her, for the genre, and for humanity itself. The days passed slowly as the negotiations continued, and Eleanor found herself growing increasingly uneasy with each conversation. The history between humanity and the Henri, so long buried in the past, hung over every meeting, every word exchanged. But it was Zaratel's words that lingered in her mind the most. You'll hate me when you know. What did she mean by that? Was it simply a threat? A warning that the truth would be too much for her to bear? Or was there something deeper? Something Zaratel hadn't yet revealed? Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the edge of something monumental. But with each passing day, the truth of their history seemed more and more like an insurmountable barrier. Could peace ever truly be achieved between their two peoples? Could a species like humanity, with its violent past, ever find redemption in the eyes of those it had wronged? The day after their conversation, Eleanor had to attend a gathering in the grand hall of the space station. The alien leaders had requested a break from the formal talks, and this gathering was to be a more informal event. Music played softly in the background as delegates from various species mingled and exchanged pleasantries. But Eleanor couldn't focus on the socializing. Her mind kept returning to Zaratel's words, to the truth that still eluded her. She found herself wandering toward the far side of the hall, where Zaratel stood alone, her back to the crowd, her hands clasped behind her. There was a distance in the way Zaratel held herself, a kind of isolation that was both physical and emotional. Eleanor approached quietly, unsure of what to say, but driven by an urge to understand more. Zaratel turned slightly as Eleanor approached, her expression unreadable. "You are troubled," she said, her voice calm and even. Eleanor hesitated, but then she spoke, her voice tinged with frustration. "I don't understand." "I'm trying to, but how can we move forward if we're constantly looking back? You keep saying that humanity is responsible for the destruction of your people. But you know as well as I do that the humans who were involved in that war are long gone. My people, we've changed. Zaratel's eyes narrowed slightly, though there was no malice behind the look. Your people have changed, yes. But the past has a way of shaping who we are, Captain Shaw. The Zonri lost everything. We cannot simply forget that. Eleanor looked down at her feet, trying to collect her thoughts. I understand that, she said quietly. I do. But I can't help what happened. I wasn't there. The humans who were responsible, none of them are alive anymore. I wasn't even born when all of this happened. Zaratel's gaze softened, though the sadness in her eyes remained.
I know you were not there, Captain Shaw.
I know you are not responsible for the sins of your ancestors. But the truth is, we are all shaped by the choices made before us.
Your people destroyed us, and yet now you stand before me, asking me to forget that.
To forgive. Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to argue, to convince Zaratel that humanity wasn't the same anymore, that the people they had once been were long gone. But the words didn't come. There was something in Zaratel's voice, something that spoke of years, even centuries, of pain and loss, something that made it impossible to ignore the weight of the truth. I don't want you to forget, Eleanor said at last, her voice thick with emotion. I just want you to understand that not all humans are the same.
I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Zaratel.
I'm just asking for a chance for us to prove that we've changed, that we can be better. Zaratel studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving Eleanor's face. I hear you, she said quietly. And perhaps there is more to your people than I first believed. The words sent a ripple of hope through Eleanor's chest, but just as quickly, the doubt returned. What did Zaratel mean by that? Was it just a fleeting moment of clarity? Or was there a deeper shift in her perspective? And even if there was, could the past ever truly be forgotten? Could the Zonri ever forgive humanity for the devastation they had caused? Before Eleanor could ask any more questions, the sound of footsteps drew her attention away from Zaratel. She turned to see a small delegation of Timar diplomats walking toward them. The atmosphere of the gathering shifted as more species began to approach, and soon the room was filled with a hum of conversation. The peace talks had resumed. Eleanor excused herself from Zaratel's side, though she couldn't help but steal one last glance at the Zonri diplomat as she walked away. There was something different about her now, something less certain, more conflicted. Eleanor didn't know if it was a good sign or a bad one, but she couldn't deny that it was a sign of change. The next few days brought more tension to the table. Every faction had their demands, and every one of them seemed to want more than the others were willing to give. But through it all, Eleanor stayed focused. She knew that peace wasn't going to come easily. It never did. But she also knew that she couldn't let the ghosts of the past dictate the future, not when there was still so much at stake. Late one evening, after a particularly heated session, Eleanor found herself once again standing before Zaratel, who had excused herself from the negotiations. The two women stood in silence for a long moment, neither of them speaking, both of them lost in their own thoughts.
At last, Zaratel spoke, her voice soft.
You say that humanity has changed, but how do you know that? How can you be sure that your people are not still driven by the same impulses that once led to our destruction? Eleanor took a deep breath, her hands clenched at her sides. I know because I've seen it. I've seen it in the way humans treat each other. I've seen it in how we help others, how we fight for what's right, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. Humanity has made mistakes, many of them. But that's not who we are anymore. We're better than that. Zaratel's gaze was piercing, as if she were searching for any sign of insincerity. But Eleanor stood firm, meeting her eyes with the same determination she had when she first entered the station. For a long while, there was nothing but silence between them. Then, at last, Zaratel spoke again, her voice softer than before. "I want to believe you," she said quietly. "I want to believe that humanity is capable of more than what we have seen, but it is not an easy thing to accept. The scars of the past run deep." Eleanor nodded, understanding the weight of Zaratel's words.
I know.
"But we can't move forward if we keep holding on to the past. All we can do is try to be better every day." Zaratel looked at her for a long moment, as if contemplating something. Then she sighed, a sound full of resignation. "Perhaps, Captain Shaw, that is all we can do. Try." Eleanor felt a flicker of hope in her chest. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe that peace was possible. It might not be easy, and it might not come quickly, but it was worth fighting for. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she had to try. And so, with a steadying breath, Eleanor turned away from Zaratel and walked back toward the negotiations, knowing that the journey ahead was far from over. But it was a journey worth taking. The final day of negotiations had arrived. The space station was buzzing with anticipation as alien delegates from every corner of the galaxy filled the grand conference hall. It was a moment of great significance, one that would decide the fate of not only the Zonri but also the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. Eleanor stood by the window of her quarters, staring out into the vast, dark expanse of space. The stars twinkled like distant promises, each one a reminder of the endless possibilities that lay ahead. Yet, the weight of the day's events hung heavy on her shoulders. The talks had reached a critical point. The factions were close to an agreement. But Zaratel, who had become both an ally and a challenge, had made it clear that the true test of this peace was not the negotiations themselves, but the willingness of both parties to forgive the past and trust each other. Eleanor had tried to remain hopeful, to believe that peace was still possible. But the more she spoke with Zaratel, the more she realized that the road to understanding would not be easy. The scars of history ran deep. The Onri had suffered at the hands of humanity, and though Zaratel had softened, the bitterness was still there, buried beneath the surface. She turned away from the window as the door to her quarters slid open. It was Zaratel. The Zonri diplomat entered the room with her usual composure. But there was something different about her today. Her posture was straighter, her eyes more focused, and yet there was an almost imperceptible shift in her expression. Something had changed, something deep inside her. Eleanor could feel it. "I thought you might be here," Zaratel said, her voice low but steady. Eleanor smiled faintly.
I'm trying to get a bit of clarity before everything is decided. It's a big day, Zaratel.
One that could change the course of history. Zaratel stepped closer, her gaze lingering on the stars outside. Yes, it could. But it is not just the future of our people that is at stake. It is the future of the galaxy. The consequences of what happens here today will ripple far beyond these walls.
Eleanor nodded in agreement, but there was a weight in her chest.
I've been thinking a lot about everything we've discussed, about our past, about your people's history. It's hard to let go of something like that. The past, it defines who we are, doesn't it? Zaratel turned to her, her eyes meeting Eleanor's with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Yes, the past defines us, but it does not have to control us. Not if we choose to let go of it. And that, Captain Shaw, is the decision that lies before us. Can we let go of the past? Can we look forward without carrying the weight of what came before?
Eleanor felt a deep sense of uncertainty flood over her. I want to believe that we can.
I want to believe that we're not doomed to repeat the mistakes of history. But how can I ask you to forgive what my people did to yours? How can I ask for that when so many Zonre lost everything? Zaratel's face softened, the sharp edges of her usual demeanor giving way to something more vulnerable. You do not need to ask for forgiveness, Eleanor. Forgiveness cannot be given on command. It must be earned. But you can show us that humanity is different. You can prove that your people are capable of change. And that, I believe, is where our future lies. Eleanor felt a flicker of hope spark inside her, prove that humanity is capable of change. The words rang in her mind like a call to action. She had spent her life fighting for peace, for understanding. But this was something different. This was a challenge not just for her, but for her entire species. I'm not sure how to prove that, Eleanor admitted. How do we show something so big? How do we prove to you that we're not the same as the humans who destroyed your world? Zara-Tel took a step closer, her eyes never leaving Eleanor's. You show us by what you do, by how you act, how you treat others. Actions speak louder than words, Captain Shaw. It is not enough to say that humanity has changed.
You must show us through your choices, through your compassion.
Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to ask Zara-Tel how she could ever convince her, how she could make up for the sins of humanity's past.
But she knew the answer already. The only way forward was to live up to the ideals she had always believed in: compassion, empathy, and a willingness to build a better future.
She had to be the change she wanted to see. I'll do whatever it takes, Eleanor said quietly.
But I need your help. I need you to believe in us, to believe that we can do better. Zara-Tel's expression softened even further, a flicker of understanding passing between them.
I will not forget what your people did to us, but I will also not close my eyes to the possibility of redemption. The choice is not just yours, Captain Shaw. It is mine as well.
We are both standing at the edge of something, and together we can decide what happens next. The two women stood there in silence, the weight of the decision heavy between them. Outside, the stars continued to burn brightly, as if oblivious to the struggle unfolding inside the walls of the space station. But Eleanor knew that this moment, this choice, would shape everything. It would decide the future of her people, the future of the Zonri, and perhaps the entire galaxy. The hour grew late, and the final meeting of the peace talks began. The large conference hall was filled with delegates from every species, each one holding their breath as the discussions reached their peak. The time for empty words and promises was over. Now, it was time for action. It was time for the decisions that would shape the galaxy for generations to come. Eleanor entered the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the weight of Zara-Tel's gaze upon her. But this time, it was different. There was no anger in it, no bitterness. Instead, there was something like hope. A hope that had begun to grow in both of them. Zara-Tel stood at the head of the table, flanked by representatives of the Zonri and the other alien factions. She gave Eleanor a small nod, signaling that it was time. Eleanor took her seat, facing the other delegates, her hands steady as she prepared to speak. "We stand here today, at a crossroads," Eleanor began, her voice strong, but filled with a quiet resolve. "We can choose to dwell on the past, to let the mistakes of our ancestors define us. Or we can choose to look forward, to build something new. We have all seen the consequences of war, of hatred, of violence, but we have also seen the power of peace. We have seen the strength of cooperation. It is time for us to move forward together." Her words hung in the air as the room fell silent. The delegates exchanged glances, weighing the gravity of her statement. Then, one by one, the other alien leaders began to speak, their voices filled with a mix of uncertainty and hope. It was clear that there was still much to be done, but the path had been set. Finally, Zara-Tel stood. She was the last to speak, and her presence filled the room. The other delegates watched in silence as she addressed the assembly. "I have long carried the weight of the past," she said, her voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "But I am ready to move forward. For my people. For humanity." for all of us.
Let us create a future where we can all live in peace.
The words echoed through the room, and for the first time, Eleanor felt a sense of true hope. The peace talks were not just a formality anymore. They were a promise that the future could be different. As the meeting drew to a close, Eleanor felt a deep sense of relief. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, she knew, were often the hardest part of any journey. As she left the hall, she glanced over at Zaratel, who stood at the back of the room, watching her. Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was no tension between them, only a shared understanding. The road ahead would not be without its challenges. There would be more work to be done, more choices to be made. But together, they had taken the first step toward something better. And for that, Eleanor was grateful. Because, in the end, it wasn't just about making peace between two peoples. It was about proving that humanity could rise above its past, that they could choose to be better. And that, more than anything, was worth fighting for.